Essex community. Renaco Taylor here. In my Latin teaching career, I've learned a lot about building community in class, and I've discovered that creating an open classroom culture is helpful in fostering difficult conversations. I'm going to elaborate on 3 of the items in my blog post to show how I've used them to complement my Latin pedagogy. First, honest and responsible pedagogy. What do I mean by that? Well, in teaching, I often think about how much material I can cover and how honest I should be about certain topics. The truth is that the 4th principal part, for example, can be taught as the supine or as the perfect passive participle. But is that important information to give my students right away? Likewise, should I address the fact that Clemens and Grumio are slaves in a Pompeian household each and every time we read about them? Challenging and difficult material is always around us as Latin teachers. That being said, it's difficult for me to ignore the male-dominated and violent Roman society built and sustained by enslaved peoples. So my question to myself became, how can I possibly be responsible and honest about all of this heavy content, especially when I've got other priorities, like how can my students retain vocabulary in an introductory year? Do I even know how to talk about these issues? Fact is, I don't often have the instructional time. It turns out, however, that the Latin textbooks and Latin literature have enough of that challenging material to talk about, and I don't always look at it this way. As a Latin teacher, I should be teaching the difficult history of Rome because so much of it is present in whatever we read. As an example, the Cambridge Latin course, Unit 1 and 2, respectively, contain a wealth of information on the lives of enslaved peoples. The enslaved characters in these series have experiences and lives that highlight the following realities. Enslaved persons were part of the familia, did manual and skilled labor, greeted visitors to the home, ate leftovers from the slave owner's table, were bought and sold, were women, provided entertainment, did not always get along with each other, got the day off for public holidays at times, had a social life with other enslaved persons, experienced a range of human emotion, were freed for good deeds, and could earn money. Likewise, in the Cambridge Latin Course Unit 2, the stark reality becomes more evident. In this stage, we learn that enslaved people worked in the mines, worked in different parts of the empire outside of Rome and Italy, were treated poorly, abused, and even put to death, and that they plotted to kill their owners, and even some were children. These readings provide valuable insight and should not be overlooked. And because they happen in stories, the books are a good reminder that teaching a difficult topic is not a one-off. In fact, the difficult stuff is challenging and can rarely be covered in one lesson. I've learned to be honest and responsible in my pedagogy. I try my best not to gloss over instances where difficult topics arise, and I try to be honest about them so that students get a better idea of the world that they're studying. Important conversations are difficult conversations. When I first started teaching, the first day of class was always a bit tricky for me. I used to wonder whether I should jump right into a lesson. Would icebreakers be ideal? Should I talk about my syllabus? Did I know what I was going to cover? Did the students even know each other? Over the years, I learned just how valuable those first days could be in setting the tone of the class and modeling how conversations could happen. On the first day, I engaged my students in a dialogue about things ranging from grading policy, class participation, respect for others, the value of listening, academic integrity, and what to do about missed work or assignments. I noticed that some of these frank conversations actually helped build trust and understanding with my students. Take academic integrity, for instance. I start by defining it and follow up by asking students if they know a friend or a classmate who's ever cheated on an assignment. This inevitably leads to questions more than answers, but we are then forced to discuss and uncover together what cheating really means and what it really looks like. Could you cheat on an in-class assignment, for example, or a homework, or was it strictly confined to assessments? Students came to realize that cheating harms their own efforts and robs them of a chance to assess their own progress and to make changes. They realized that it is also unfair to their classmates and teacher, and that it is disrespectful. This realization did not come from me telling them that cheating is wrong and punishable in X number of ways. I realized that these opportunities at the start of the year not only helped me set the tone for the class, but helped me practice having meaningful exchanges with my students that could later be useful when we pause to discuss a cultural or social topic and interaction in a story. Lastly, interrogate the Latin literature. Another way I have fostered exchange and conversations in class before diving directly into an uncomfortable or challenging topic is by inviting students to interrogate the narratives and the characters in any given Latin reading. This is useful after I've assigned a story, after the grammar has been introduced, and after the passage is translated. Instead of moving on to a difficult topic explicitly, I ask questions. Two stories come to mind when I think of interrogating Latin narratives. The first is the story Papaya from the Cambridge Latin course, Stage 5, and the other is Marcus Ebrius Est, which appears in Chapter 23 of the Oxford Latin course. In Papaya, the Ancilla Papaya urges her aged dominus, Lucrio, to leave the house and attend the play at the theater. It is in fact a holiday, and she really wants him out of the house so that she can meet up with Grumio. In her frustration, Papaya communicates with Lucrio in a roundabout way to get him to leave the house. In the end, it finally works. I then ask my students the following types of questions. What do you think about Papaya's strategy to get Lucrio out? Would you describe her communication as direct or indirect? Why? And are there pros and cons to this type of communication? Have you yourself ever communicated this way to your friends, to classmates, or maybe even to a family member or a parent? What were your reasons and motivations? Why might Papaya have chosen to communicate this way? And lastly, do you think that the relationship between Papaya and Lucrio has something to do with the way she communicated? Of course, this last question is very close to the topic of slavery and the inherent power dynamic. But this is the point. You get to difficult topics by a slow interrogation of a Latin passage. Power dynamics, for example, exist in our world, and children sense it at play everywhere, both in their lives at home and at school. Having some of these present realities helps them connect to the difficult or uncomfortable topics we sometimes gloss over. In the Oxford Latin course, Marcus Cicero, son of Cicero, in this fictional account, is at the baths with Quintus Horatius Flaccus, the poet Horace. They are friends. Marcus is drunk and cannot get up off the floor. His father would ultimately send him off to Greece because of this, but there is a social dynamic at play in this friendship that I try to address before I move on to any conversation about alcohol consumption, underage drinking, or alcohol use in the Roman world. It is the obviously complicated friendship between Marcus and Quintus. Here are some of the types of questions that I've asked. How many of us have a close friend or friends who look out for us but are otherwise not kind to other people, or even themselves? I do encourage my students not to blurt out names and to be somewhat discreet, and I remind them that this is a reflection exercise. I go on. How many of us have been in friendships where one friend is well behaved and the other is not so well behaved? What was valuable about such a friendship? What was exciting about it? How did the friendship last? What did it? Why or why not? I think these two stories offer enough drama for a middle schooler. But the same kinds of questions work just as well with Latin texts across the board and older students. I try to be flexible with readings, and I enjoy mixing it up within a certain framework. The following ideas have helped create a framework for using passages in this way. How do I create my questions? Well, I go to the standard who, what, where, when, why, and how questions, but I try to ensure that some are open-ended in order to make space for exploring the characters, their behaviors, and their motivations. I ask my students to write a response to a prompt or a question in order to foster thinking about the interpersonal relationships. I also do my best to be mindful of my own biases and whether or not to share them, and whether or not there's a possibility for them to spill out haphazardly. The last point, I admit, takes a certain amount of self-control, but it helps me when I remember that this is an opportunity for my students to practice their self-expression and to offer an informed opinion. I am also wary that younger students, middle school aged, may be more easily swayed by my expressed biases, and so they may suppress their own views, where older students may relish the opportunity to debate me. I really try my best to avoid these extremes, and when done well, I find that the students interrogate each other's views more readily. For me, these types of conversations really lend themselves to supporting diversity and inclusion in the classroom. Not simply because they can lead to more challenging conversations, but because they allow students to open up and share not only their views, but share the way that they think. For me, it's ultimately an opportunity to tease out their humanity and to have them add to the diversity of thought and inquiry that I strive to foster in my teaching. Thank you.